Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. Over time I've made the effort on here to talk about every arcade and home console release of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles games during the classic era for the franchise. In fact, we've even looked at the amazing fan project that pulls elements from all of these games together, known as Rescue Palooza. However, despite all of this, there are still more Turtles video games from this period that are more than worth discussing. So today we are going to be covering a video game that, in my opinion, on release, may have been the best Turtles game that consumers could own yet. In this content we are going to be discussing the history of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Fall of the Foot Clan, a Turtles game that was vastly different to anything that came before it, and arguably in many ways superior too. While this may look like a simple, rudimentary monochrome game, Konami managed to get just about everything right with this one. So within this episode, let us discuss how this was achieved and why this game is debatably better than every other Turtles game that was available in the home at the time. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the mad story of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Fall of the Foot Clan. Yeah! The year is 1990. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is as hot as it has ever been, with the toys and merchandise selling like hotcakes, the animated TV show being a household favourite, and even a live action movie showing in cinemas earlier that same year. The characters that had first originated in comic book form had recently entered the world of video games too, with two different titles seeing release in 1989, both of which had been developed by Konami. We had the amazing 4-player arcade beat-em-up and a side-scrolling platforming action game available on the NES, and various other home computer formats. The latter was polarising to say the least, with the game still receiving mixed reception from gamers right up until this very day. The game that was primarily played by children is considered extremely difficult, and the callbacks featured from the popular animated TV show are fairly limited. All in all, many kids pined for a game in the home that delivered an experience that was closer to what could be found in the arcades. By the following year of 1990, children's prayers were answered. Well, kind of at least, with an NES home conversion of the game arriving. The game was obviously massively scaled back, cutting the game down from 4-player co-op to 2, and reducing the graphics and amount of sprites that appear on screen to such an extreme degree that the game is barely recognisable. To make matters worse, the various home computer ports of this game were generally considered even rougher. In many ways, it is a massive shame that they did not simply port the game to the Sega Mega Drive instead, and strike a deal with Sega to make it a packing game, as I feel there is a strong chance that the Turtles was a powerful enough brand that children could have probably forced their parents to buy the wonderful 16-bit platform before Sonic Mania would begin to sweep the world less than 1 year later. A good port of the Turtles arcade game potentially could have changed the entire course of history, but so far gamers had a choice at home between two fairly flawed yet still playable NES games. But away from living room consoles and the arcades, a new gaming entertainment medium was arising. Released in 1989, the Game Boy had quickly picked up steam as the world's most popular handheld gaming device. The system's cheap price point, Nintendo's strong brand recognition, and popular early titles such as Super Mario Land and Tetris had quickly made the Game Boy a must-own system. The handheld had quickly found its way into the hands of lots of children, something the Mega Drive was yet to do by that point, making it the perfect platform to house a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles video game. In August of 1990, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Fall of the Foot Clan would arrive on the humble handheld system. Gameplay wise, the title brought to the table something that was vastly different to what could be played on the television at the time. Rather than taking the arcade beat-em-up approach with this one, Konami opted to release yet another side-scrolling platformer, which was still probably the world's most popular genre at that point. Bearing in mind, this game released shortly before Sonic the Hedgehog with Mario Mania running wild. I will talk about the style of play found in this game more shortly, but first let's briefly touch on the in-game story. The plot is outlined at the beginning of a playthrough, with the title mirroring characters found within the popular animated show. The goal of the game is to rescue April, who has been kidnapped by Shredder, Krang and his cohorts. It is up to the Turtles, Leonardo, Michelangelo, Donatello and Rembrandt to locate and rescue her. The game sees our heroes lead chase through sewers, the streets of New York and other settings on their quest to reach the damsel in distress. When it comes to this title, in my opinion Konami did a fantastic job of programming a game that was perfectly optimised for both the Game Boy hardware and the Turtles core audience. What I essentially mean by this is that the NES game was considered too difficult and convoluted by many, whereas Fall of the Foot Clan on the other hand presents a much more simplistic run and jump style platforming game. The inclusion of key characters such as Krang within the game, combined with the title's less steep difficulty, made this game very appealing to the Turtles' target demographic. I think Konami should also be praised for the game's aesthetics. Many early Game Boy games, including even Super Mario Land, featured sprites in the titles that were not really ideal for Game Boy hardware. The Game Boy's tiny screen, paired with the device's motion blur and lack of a front or backlight, would mean that it was sometimes hard to see Game Boy screens. So the handheld was only really playable under the greatest of lighting conditions. After a while, developers would realise that in order to combat this problem, it made sense to include bigger sprites in Game Boy games than what would be present on the screen in home console games. Fall of the Foot Clan is one of the earlier Game Boy games to include large sprites, a gameplay design feature that Nintendo would not catch up with in their Mario series until another 2 years later, with the release of Super Mario Land 2 6 Golden Coins. Fall of the Foot Clan is a very early example of Game Boy programming done exactly right. Across the board, the game shines in all the key areas in which it was designed to do so in, even offering character select on the rudimentary device, allowing players to play as any of the 4 turtles they desired. While the 4 sprites generally look the same due to the lack of colour on the Game Boy, at least each of them have their trademark weapons, making them more than easy to differentiate. Players must travel from A to B through a total of 5 simple stages, resulting in a pick up and play experience that can easily be beaten in one play session when in the back of a car or on a train journey. The first stage sees the turtles slowly slashing their way through the streets of New York, with the classic Turtles theme blaring out the Game Boy, produced by the classic 8-bit sound system. Here you take on foot soldiers and other clan members, just as the game promised. In typical Turtles fashion, action quickly moves to the sewers, where players will hear music composed specifically for this game for the first time. Speaking of this title's soundtrack, it is not surprising at all that it sounds fantastic, as all the music in the game was created by Michiru Yamane, a woman who would go down in history as a legendary gaming music composer, with her work on the Castlevania Symphony of the Night soundtrack being her magnum opus. A title she would work on 7 years after this one. When slashing through New York back streets and underground sewers, players will quickly note how simplistic and simple the game's controls are. In fact, the game's options menu even lets gamers assign the simplicity to their taste, with the ability to assign a jump and attack command to each of the Game Boy's action buttons. The basic, methodical gameplay is reminiscent in many ways to Konami's early Castlevania games. You can even pick up random food off the floor to replenish health, trading out joints of meat for obviously pizza on this occasion. Cowabunga, dude. Players can also attack while either crouching and jumping too, being able to perform jump kicks in the air and throw shoryukens while ducking. It's a simple system, but it works a treat. The end of the first stage sees a boss fight take place against Rocksteady, an important member of the cast of the animated series and other media. Players can deflect his bullets with more slashing. Between stages, players are treated with very simple cutscenes to help progress the story and maintain Turtles continuity, which is a nice touch. Stage 2 takes the form of a factory setting, and moving barrels and mechanical obstacles must be avoided while indulging in platforming while taking on familiar foe. It's simple, relaxing stuff that's perfect for an on-the-go experience. The end of this stage ends with an encounter with Bebop, giving players the opportunity to take out both members of this dynamic duo. He can fire his laser gun and perform running headbutts. Stage 3 is the most impressive in the game we have looked at yet, due to the fact that action takes place atop moving traffic, featuring a scrolling background layer that creates an illusion of movement. Once again, bearing in mind this one is a very early Game Boy game, Konami did an amazing job of utilising Game Boy hardware back in the days where developers were still learning the ropes with the system. The convoy stage culminates with a fight against the aerial Baxter Stockman, the human and fly mutant with a very different attack pattern to previous bosses. Stage 4 moves action to the interior of a mountain cavern. While IGN would probably give this game 6 out of 10 for too much water, unlike many other games, the water does not function as a hindrance to the player and appears to exist purely for aesthetic purposes rather than anything else. As if a player falls from a log stage or jump in between, players can simply walk along the bottom of a body of water, even slashing fish along the way. As we progress through the cave, it eventually becomes water free, with the final throes of the level presenting combat against Shredder himself, with the iconic character serving as the penultimate boss for the game. The final stage sees the player move onto the famous Technodrome, a location that serves as the last stronghold within many Turtles titles. The area is exactly what fans would expect. There are robotic opponents, dangerous lasers and other intimidating obstacles to overcome. The end of the game treats players with a final encounter against Krang, a boss that fans of the animated series would greatly appreciate, especially when you consider that he was completely missing from the 1989 NES game. The closing scene sees April rescued and the Technodrome crashing down. A cheesy text roll finally informs the player that Shredder and Krang's whereabouts are not known, meaning that none of us will be able to relax sleeping in our shells tonight. The game would be universally praised on release, and most of those who have reviewed the game retrospectively look at this game positively too. For an early Game Boy game and a title aimed at the Turtles' key audience demographic, as laid out earlier, I truly believe that the programming of this game was executed picture perfectly for what this game was, and it was the most optimised Turtles game for a home system yet in my opinion. When you look at the game's credits, none of this is at all that surprising really, as apart from Michiru Yamani's involvement with the music we mentioned earlier, the game was designed and supervised by Naoki Matsu, a man who had played a huge role in the development of Konami's legendary Snatcher game as a programmer and engineer, a game that is often considered today as Hideo Koshima's first masterpiece. So, Fall of the Foot Clan had a really high quality development team behind its creation at Konami. All in all, I do not really think that this game is celebrated enough for what it achieved on the Game Boy so early on, but I think it certainly deserves gamers' respect for utilising the Turtles license so well, particularly when we take into account that American publishers like LJN would have simply abused the Turtles brand if it had fallen under their control. It really is admirable that Konami made games like this decent, even though Western publishers would not have bothered, banking on the fact that the game would have sold well on the Turtles' name value alone. So, cowabunga dude, more like cow freaking piece of delicious chocolate cake. Yeah. As we know, this was only the beginning, and we would get a whole trilogy of Game Boy Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles games on the device, so I cannot wait to talk about those on here in the future. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was the mad story of Fall of the Foot Clan. Make sure you subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell to ensure you do not miss my follow-ups to this video. And let me know down in the comments what you think of the Game Boy Trilogy and which one was your favourite. As usual, thank yous to everyone who supports my work on Patreon, as I only work full-time on the platform due to your appreciation. I hope you continue to enjoy my Patreon-only bonus library of content, and everything else I have on offer to the Top Hat community. Speaking of patrons, thank yous go out to Sebastian Velez, Carl Johnson, The Murder of Crows, Heo Paulo Lopez, Joseph Rasmick, Ben Harradine, Corey Marsh Sr., Capcom vs SNK, BXL Gotham, Ron Dinched, Evan Border, Philip Manth, Azra Rorokai, Keith Ferguson, Dropkin Varela, Michael Cullix, Ego, Jordan Durant, Adriel Light 85, Alethea Swanson, Nick Daniels, Princess Zana, Glennie Glenn, Daniel Daly, Computer Man, House of the Ted, ECU Professor, Craig Jenkins, Kid Anime, Justin Wang, Aaron McNamara, Hermes Gonzalez, Instant Gratification Monkey, Man Shovel, James Bishop, JB, Michael Hall, Wesley Sang-hee, Wayne Kerr, Langston Miller, New, Brian Barry, Sarah Powell, Vlamik Renee, Marvin Aaron Liga, Chris Cool, TOG Driver, Adrian Hannington, Bernard NG, Richard Stu Stewart, James McDonald, Dan Van Dammit, Lewis Viant, John Bates, David Bow, Chris Fisk, Mike Bruno, Rick67, Antonio Rodriguez, Retroverse.com, Casey Wright, Synth Spaces, Zai, Andrew Bazanski, Gunther Hendricks, and everybody else who supports my work in all shapes and forms. Thank you.